So it looks like we're ready to get started. So thank you everyone who could make it. Here is Liz Hitch. She's a moderator for today. She's a social worker who is visiting with us from Des Moines, and she'll be introducing our very esteemed speaker today.
Judge Rosemarie Aquilina earned her Juris Doctorate degree from Western Michigan Thomas M. Cooley Law School in 1984 after earning her Bachelor of Arts degree from Michigan State University in 1979. She began her legal career working in the Michigan Senate as the administrative assistant, after which she opened Aquilina Law Firm, PLC. Judge Aquilina became part of Michigan's history as the first female JAG officer in the Michigan Army National Guard, where she served honorably for 20 years. Judge Aquilina has made history as she allowed 156 sister survivors and other victims, for a total of 169 victims, to speak during the 7-day sentencing in the People versus Nassar case. She made history as the first female professor to speak at the MSU College of Law commencement in the spring of 2018. Most recently, she made history holding the first hybrid Zoom jury trial during the pandemic in 2020. Judge Aquilina has served as a civilian judge for 17 years. She also has served as an adjunct professor in both Western Michigan Thomas M. Cooley Law School and at Michigan State University College of Law, and received outstanding teaching awards from both. Additionally, Judge Aquilina is a published fiction author, and her nonfiction memoir, Just Watch Me, was released in December 2020 by Audible as part of the first originals from Reese Witherspoon and Hello Sunshine. Judge Aquilina, represented by Creative Artists Agency, is a motivational speaker and speaks worldwide about many issues that include, but is not limited to, changing the narrative to ensure safety, equity, equality, and awareness in regard to sexual assault, athlete safety, bullying, giving voice to those who don't have one, letting every person know that they matter and are heard, and that equal treatment is a right, not an afterthought. She has 5 children and 3 grandchildren, and she resides in East Lansing, Michigan. So please help me to welcome Judge Aquilina.
Thank you for inviting me. You know, I did live as a child both in Des Moines, Iowa and Iowa City, Iowa, when my dad was in medical school. So I have fond memories of Iowa.
How long was that for?
It was about a year each, but I loved Iowa. I thought the people were great. I loved the massive cornfields and all the things that are true of Iowa. I just thought it was just very wholesome, fun, had great friends. So a lot of respect for all of you from Iowa.
I was surprised that didn't make the bio that I was reading. Also, I was going to say that your father is a doctor.
Yes. My father and brothers are doctors, and my sister.
And they wanted you to be a doctor.
Yes. I'm only really a lawyer out of anger because I didn't have a voice when I was a small child. My parents really raised us to be equal, but I learned really quickly we weren't equal because the boys always had the better toys and the girls had just, dolls and other things that I thought were pretty stupid. But anyway, my father, I wanted to be a writer. And obviously now I am. I have 3 novels out, more are coming in fiction, and then I have the nonfiction. But my father, when I said I wanted to be a writer, treated me like I was going to Hollywood to make movies. And of course, that's a pipe dream for most, not everybody, if you make it. And said, how are you going to support yourself? I was very angry with me because he thought going to medical school was the only career. Trust me, when I say no one wants me to be a doctor, a vet, in the medical field at all. I hate math and I hate science. That is not the right fit for me. So out of anger, I said, well, then I'm going to law school. And I did that because overall doctors hate lawyers. So that was me using my voice at a pretty young age.
Hence your memoir, Just Watch Me.
Yes, hence that. Yes.
So before we get started, Jill, I do want to mention that some of the content that is discussed may be triggering for some people. So if you have to step out, please do so. Aline is going to put in the chat some resources if you need some extra assistance. And also We have some questions to ask. However, we really want to know what it is that you guys want to know. So we highly encourage you to submit some questions. Rosemarie, you talk about a lot of different topics and you're very passionate about them. So she'll let you know if there isn't questions should be an answer. But yeah, so if you're on Zoom, if you could put your questions in the chat, and then Aline will be watching for that. And then if you're in the classroom, then I think that there's some papers that you can write a question and then just pass it over to the side, and we'll be getting those. So anything else before we get started?
Liz, we were talking about you having watched on Zoom some of my court proceedings. And for those of you who are tired of reruns, you certainly can Zoom into many courts around the country. But if you'd like to Zoom into mine, I'm starting a jury trial. I'm not sure if we're hoping to do jury selection this Friday, and it will go into next week. It's a pretty awful case. Wednesdays, I have motion day. You're going to hear all sorts of things from pleas, sentencings, motions, probation violations, all sorts of things. I have 100% criminal docket, which means at my level, it's felonies and the misdemeanors that come up. Misdemeanor is punishable by up to a year. Anything above that is a felony, and that's primarily what I deal with. So I have a lot of people Zooming in from all over the world, and I've put my Zoom number in the chat. We are Eastern time. And so we start about 9 o'clock. Sometimes it's a little later because I have meetings with attorneys and what have you. And sometimes we go into private sessions because there are non-public hearings, but we let you know. So if anytime you want to Zoom in and see real court 5 days a week, except for the rare occasion I take a vacation, I'm there and Zoom in.
Yeah, and I've sat through several of them. And so it's really fun to just watch you in your element and just watch how you run the courtroom. So I highly suggest doing that. So while we're talking about your role in the courtroom, do you mind talking about the types of cases that you see?
I see felonies. Some of them are low severity, and I see a lot of right now, especially with COVID, I'm seeing a lot of domestic violence, sexual assault of children, of spouses, of strangers, but not so much stranger danger. Right now, I'm seeing more of those you ought to be afraid of. And I'm seeing some robberies, home invasions. I see the worst of the worst. So there's a lot of drunk driving. There is a lot of illegal drug use and the hardcore stuff. We're not talking marijuana. The laws have loosened up on that. And meth, I thought, had gone away because we passed new laws, and most states had, about the products that could be sold that you make meth from. But they've found a way around that. Some people are getting Sudafed and other drugs in the mail, and they're also using alternate products to make meth. Meth is on the rise, and it is horrifying. We are seeing a lot of deaths because there's not a lot of help out there. All of the medical people are overtaxed. The counselors, therapists, you can't even get in. A lot of the substance abuse places are closed. So we are seeing a lot of death due to drug overdose, heroin, etc. So I deal with that day in and day out. Child abuse is on the rise. It's always there, but now with COVID, especially being locked in, it was there, but people were saying, well, it's not really being reported. Well, of course not, because those people who are being abused were behind doors and there was nowhere to report it to. They couldn't leave. Now that there's more freedom, we are seeing a rise in that. And the horrifying things that people do to each other, I deal with on a daily basis. And it really is eye-opening. For me personally, my children can tell you that I'm the mom who does not let them go out. I do let them go out. But here's the thing is, I want to know where they are, who they're with. I have specific times to pick them up. They have their cell phones. I check their cell phones to see who they're talking with. I don't give them the freedom that maybe I experienced as a child, because the things that I see today are mortifying. And there's a lot of human trafficking that is on the rise. I'm seeing a lot of that. So I see really the worst of the worst.
Wow. So you've been an inspiration to many people, with victims, but not only victims in the courtroom, but also, I would say, defendants even. You've had people come to your courtroom and follow up with you or talk to you about where they're at, and they may have not liked you necessarily at that time, but they've really learned to have a lot of respect for you and stuff like that. What do you think that is?
Well, I think that you can all think back, even just to the simple things you didn't want to do because your parents said, make your bed or come home at 9 or whatever they told you. And you thought, I don't want to do that. And then when you grew up, you thought, geez, I'm so thankful my parent told me that. What I do on the bench, I listen to defendants, and I want you all to think about this. It is not an hour television show. It's real life. And these people have a lot of issues, and they never had a mommy and daddy who said, you matter. I care about you. I love you. I will always be there. Many of them were told exactly the opposite. They grew up not just in poverty, but in a world where it was okay to be raped. It was okay to not go to school. It was okay to use drugs when you were, 9, 10, 11 years old. In fact, you were given them so then someone could rape you. So I always try to find the backstory. How can I help you? Right? What would you like me to know, and how can I help you? Not just with the victims, okay, but with the defendants, because the backstory then tells me how I can help them in terms of rehabilitation. Because if you think about it, most people get out of prison. They all get out of jail. Jail is only up to a year. Prison is over a year. Most people get out. And if we've treated them right and we tell them they can do better, I get countless letters saying, you were the first person that told me I mattered. I'm getting better because of you. I thank you for putting me behind bars and your kindness toward me. And I'm going to come back and show you the great things I've done, just like you had told me. And that's what we really want to see when someone goes off to prison, because if we have been mean to them, all right, now some people deserve it. Okay, I'm not saying, hand everybody a bouquet of roses when they go to prison. But if we let them know they matter and that this shouldn't define them, and if they've done all these bad things, they certainly can do good things. They come out and at least try. They're not angry. They're not going to blow up our schools and our movie theaters. And sometimes when the prosecutor says this person isn't worthy, they need to go to prison, and I hear the backstory, I say, this is not their failure. This is our failure. What happened to rehabilitation? They're humans. So I put them on probation, and I address the fact that they were assaulted as a child, the fact that they grew up without a mom and a dad who was drunk, or whatever the issue is. Most people I send to cognitive behavioral. Sometimes they simply need to go to grief therapy and really address what happened. There's a lot of trauma in childhood, as we know, but when it's not addressed, it surfaces kind of like that ugly pimple on the forehead. It is going to burst. And, really, right? And so it bursts in the form of hurting other people, because hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And so if we can go back and we can look at those issues and help them understand that this wasn't their fault, and this crime spree is a cry for help, and they can overcome it, and they do matter, and we care about them. We save lives. So I always try to do that. Now, it's not always possible. I have had to send many people to prison for life because they simply cannot walk with the rest of us. But where you find a human being who wants to be rehabilitated, who never got the chance, and you tell them they're worthy, they come back repeatedly and say, you were the first person who told me I mattered. Can you imagine being told that? Mm-hmm. And with victims, when I say, what would you like me to know and how can I help? And they tell me their story. Many times victims come to court and I'm the first person they trust to tell me what happened. And even though a whole bunch of people might have known what happened, they don't give them the detail that I get. And countless people come up to me and say, how did you do that? Even lawyers will say, may I approach? I talked to my client. I talked to the victim. The victim's advocate will say, I talked to the victim a dozen times. How did you get that person to talk? That's really simple. You have to give them a safe space. You cannot ask questions that shame, that blame, that cut them off, that make them feel somehow guilty because they're already feeling that. You simply have to open the door and let them walk through it and know that your arms are open wide. And how do I do that? What would you like me to know? How can I help?
And I've seen you in the courtroom do that and seen how these people have really opened up and they share more than what they would share with their therapist, even in some cases and stuff. And it's really just being present and asking them those open-ended questions, like you said.
Yeah.
When you talk about rehabilitating and this class, we're focused on the sexual violence and stuff like that. With the Me Too and the Time's Up stuff, that has brought in all these cases that are a wide range of cases. So you have even the Larry Nassar, you have Weinstein and stuff like that. And those people can clearly not be rehabilitated. Do you believe that there are sexual violent offenders that can be rehabilitated?
I think, again, we have to look at the history. And I can tell you that when I read the histories, we get what's called a pre-sentence investigation report for every felony. And it doesn't just talk about the crime, but it looks at the history, the crimes, the background, the parents, the employment, drug addiction, mental illness, if there is any, medications they're on, all sorts of things. And it is very clear to me that most, maybe not all, but most persons who commit sexual assaults have been assaulted at some point in their life. And they didn't know then, especially when they were young, and they didn't know that that was wrong. They thought that was a way to love someone. And that's not always the case, but that is often the case. So when you have someone like that, and it's really embedded deeply, and from when they were young, you have to go back in time and you have to give them very specific long-term therapy. Is there a cure for sexual predators? I'm not convinced. I think you have to dig deep and look at the reasons why and address those and have a long-term plan for the abusers. I can tell you I had a defendant, and it's actually in my book. I'm so proud of this man. He was an older man, and he had been married over 20 years. And what struck me was that his wife was there every hearing, every time. And he was a very nice man, but predators often are. And what he liked to do, he never sexually assaulted anybody to my knowledge. There's no history of it. He liked to go to coffee shops, dry cleaners, places where young women worked, and pull out his penis and masturbate, show them what he had. And he had been arrested multiple times. And in our state, that crime, the punishment is from 1 day up to life. So I have really broad discretion. And the prosecutor stood adamantly and said, Your Honor, there are 8 or 9, I don't remember, it was maybe a dozen offenses. His guidelines are life. You have to give him life. There's nothing else that can be done with this man. The defense counsel said, well, I know of a doctor who is experimenting with this treatment, and it's Depo-Lupron. It's a birth control drug, and they use it for other things as well. And he said, I think they've had enough luck where would you be willing to have a hearing on it? So I said, absolutely, over the objections of the prosecutor. So we had a hearing. And what I heard from this expert was that they'd had great success because it took down that sex drive. And so I said, okay, I'm going to put him in jail for a year. He'll be taking the medication, and then I'll have him on probation for 5 years because that's the maximum I could put him on. And the prosecutor said, well, Judge, we're going to appeal you. You absolutely have no authority to prescribe anything. I said, honey, I'm not prescribing anything. The doctor is. All I am doing is saying, follow your doctor's orders. And the man and his wife said, look, we have no problem. I will take the medicine. I'll be behind bars. I have no problem doing that. So for a year, the doctor came, the sheriff let him in, he administered the medication. Thereafter, he stayed on the medication for 5 years without incident, not so much as jaywalking, nothing. And this had been a chronic problem. So that helped him. It saved his life. It saved his marriage. It saved our community, quite honestly. And it saved a lot of resources because it would cost about $40,000 a year for the rest of his life to house him in prison. Now, sexual predators, I think if you intervene early, maybe you can help and keep them in treatment. But I have also had multiple cases where someone is in prison, they are on parole, and they commit another even more heinous sexual assault. So do I think there's a cure? Not really. Do I think that we can get at this with early intervention and working with the medical community and trying to develop new drugs, making sure they stay in therapy, having support group, and having those trauma issues addressed? I think there's hope.
With how you handled the Larry Nassar case, did you do anything different because that case was so big? What I'm referring to is that you let, was it
156 sister survivors, 169 altogether. I always let everybody speak. The prosecutor, when the prosecutor and defense came to me, and I'd been planning for a trial, I have such a busy lifestyle. I don't always watch the Olympics. I knew some of the names. I didn't know they were coming in front of me initially or that they were even involved in the case. I don't look at those things. I don't get police reports. I didn't know Larry Nassar. He was in our community for years. I didn't know him. I'm not part of the gymnast community. I'm just a busy mom and judge and writer and all the things I do. I no clue about this case until it actually came to me. And the media calls, and I'm starting to read articles, and I had to put a gag order out there so that we could get a clean case and stop everybody talking. And the girls hated me because of that. But I needed to get a clean jury, and I was assured that there were experts on both sides. The attorneys came to me a few days before Thanksgiving and said, would you accept a plea? And I had already called in 200 jurors with special questions that they would have to ask. We had called up 800. We were doing them in batches of 200. And they told me what the plea agreement was. And that it really, plea agreements, when you get into sexual assault, as a judge, I'm not happy with all of them, and some I don't accept. But I'm always thinking, what happens to the victim if they go to trial? Victims commit suicide. They're bulimic. They cut. There's all sorts of things that they do because they can't handle going to trial, publicly talking about what happened to them. It's a huge trigger. And I knew at that point that there were victims who were in their 30s and 40s, but also ones who were underage. And I know a lot about trauma. So I understood it was in everybody's best interest to accept the plea. So he pled to 7 counts out of 29, and he pled to 7 first-degree criminal sexual conduct, which are life offenses. And then as part of the plea, they also did not issue on the additional child pornography they found on his phone. The people said, and although it's 7, we're going to have more testify. I said, everyone can testify. I've never put a limit on it. I'm not going to put a limit on it. And when they drafted their plea agreement, they put the limit of 125. That was their agreement. That wasn't my agreement. I have always let everybody speak because crime doesn't have a border. And the defense, of course, said, well, there's doctors who want to talk. There's other people who want to talk. And I said, well, if you don't like it, appeal me. I don't care. Here's the thing. I want to step away from the Nassar case for just a minute and give you this example because you really need to understand the Crime Victims' Rights Act talks about victims being allowed to speak, and they have other rights as well. But in that vein, let's just talk about speaking and victim. It doesn't say the person attacked. It says victim. I had a case of a home invasion where young couple of kids bought a house, very nice house in a nice part of our county. And then as a reward for unpacking, they went to Florida. The kids must have talked about it at school. And so people in the neighborhood and community knew they were going to Disney. They did not know, however, that the sister of the mom was going to be in the house while they were gone. They didn't want to leave the house alone. So there was a break-in. The burglars did not know the sister was going to be there. And so everybody was surprised. She was surprised. They were surprised. And they ended up duct taping her to the bed. Pillowcase over her head. She's taped. She got real still as they're breaking in, taking guns, medication, everything, jewelry, everything they could. And she got real still, but was working her way through the tape and did. And when the house was really quiet, she got out and she ran to her car and she dialed 911 on the way and she locked herself in the car. And just as she was pulling out of the driveway, they were going back in the house for more and they threw themselves on the windshield. It was just like a movie. And she backed out, they fell off. And because she had called 911, she heard sirens and she stopped the siren and she told them. And ultimately they were caught. What happened there? Who was the victim? She clearly was the victim. The sister was in the house. But the family learned about it. They came home. They couldn't sleep in the house. They bought dogs. They bought a burglar alarm. They didn't feel safe. And the sister only came over during the day and for short periods of time. They were all traumatized. They were all victims, not just the sister. They ultimately sold the house and moved away. That's how traumatized they were. You see, crime doesn't have a border. And so when I read the word victim in the Crime Victims' Rights Act, I look at it as this rippling effect. So yes, you saw 169 people testify in front of me. I would have sat there for 2,000. It doesn't matter. If the crime touches you, I believe you have a right, because it's your courtroom. It is not my courtroom. I believe it's your courtroom. You have the right to your day in court and to tell me how you felt and what happened. More importantly, the defendant gets to hear the effect of what their crime did to the victim. And ultimately, there is, and I've watched it, there's healing on both sides when that happens. I've seen it happen in my courtroom. You saw it happen in the Nassar case, I hope. I think that's what you saw. That's what I saw, but I see it in countless cases.
Now, you had parents of the girls who were sexually abused, but you also had Nassar's colleagues, some of them, because he groomed the environment.
They were very upset. And, I've always done this. So I know the power of the robe. I think giving voice to everybody is important. And, there was a doctor who was absolutely heartbroken. If you watch his testimony, he basically says, how dare you? I trusted you with my patients who I love. I put them in your hands and you assaulted them. How dare you? And it was really important for that doctor to get that out. He's a victim.
Yeah, some of the doctors were talking about how they had referred people to Nassar, so they have that guilt as well. And then when some of the survivors were speaking forward, he would tell his colleagues that they have mental illness and creating this whole story about these victims and stuff. And so making you not want to believe and stuff. It was really confusing for people and they trusted him, So
I think the importance of, and if you've watched At the Heart of Gold, and if you ever all want to watch it as a class, I can get you some special permission to watch it and we can have a conversation about it after. But the importance of At the Heart of Gold, and you can also watch it with Athlete A to really get the full picture. But I think At the Heart of Gold really goes to what you're talking about. It shows the grooming that went on. And grooming is a process of an adult who establishes an emotional connection with a child in order to abuse the child. It can be in person, it can be online. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but Nassar groomed all of those young girls. Trinae Gonzer, she thought of him as this wonderful uncle kind of thing. He assaulted her since she was about 6 years old. And overall, he assaulted her, I think she estimates about 850 times. All right. And he groomed the police to believe, well, this is medical. There's nothing wrong with it. It's medical. Let me do a demonstration. He groomed his colleagues. He groomed the university. He groomed the parents. He groomed everybody to believe that he was the only guy that could get them to the Olympics. He was the only one who could help them, that they were special. He basically told each one of those girls how special they were. He gave them gifts. He slowly pushed the boundaries so that they all relied on him, so that they believed him. Because over the years, think about this. The saddest part of this whole case for me is that 30 years ago, if somebody would have listened to just one of the girls who complained, this case never would have been mine, and hundreds, maybe thousands would have been spared. And what he would do, and others around him, all right, because money and medals over the safety of children, that was the thinking. They gaslighted them, and gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. It's a manipulating tactic used to gain power. It makes the victim question what they know to be true. So there were girls who said, I don't understand how this is helping me. What are you doing? And he would say, oh, the body's all connected. Or they would tell their coach, Kathy Klages, or whoever it was. And she would say, well, we can complain about this, but then it'll affect the team. We might not make it to the Olympics, whatever would make the girl back down and not trust her own gut that said, man, someone putting their fingers in my vagina when my ankle is swollen doesn't make sense to me. And then what we also had is we see this pattern, because now we have the older athletes, when the younger ones would say, I don't like this, there's something wrong here. The older ones would say, oh, he does it to me all the time. It's perfectly fine. And so this continues and continues. And then there's so many people, and you can see it in this film, who say, well, how did the parents not know? Well, the parents were right in the room. And so that's one of the things that I talk about around the world, because this isn't the only case I've seen it in. You have to have the tough conversations. You have to use the right body parts. You need to understand informed consent. The parents would look, they'd be across the room. The girl would be on the bed in these loose shorts, and he'd put a sheet over them, and there'd be towels, so it'd be blocking the parents' view, and he would do his thing. Now, the girl is looking and going, Jesus hurts, kind of thing. And the parent has a real encouraging face, as we all do when our kids are getting a shot or what have you. Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. You're almost done. You're almost done. And so there's this miscommunication about what's happening. The parent thinks there's actual treatment going on. The child thinks that these ungloved fingers without Vaseline or any lubricant at all. The child is saying, what's going on here? And the parent doesn't know, can't see. So it's a huge misstep, a huge miscommunication. But he groomed everybody to believe that was right. And he was the one to do it.
Mm-hmm. He'd even have pictures of the Olympians on the wall and stuff like that for them to see. And even when some of the survivors came forward, there were survivors that were in complete shock. Even Trinae Gonzer, she was like defending him. And when she talks about that, about defending him and how it was so hard for her to believe. And that's all part of that grooming and stuff, because a lot of times you do build that relationship that you are, Trinae, that was her friend, she really liked him. And just watching her testimony was just gut-wrenching, it was just.
Yeah. Trinae, ultimately, it was gut-wrenching. She ultimately, her words were to the effect of, my friend, what have you done? It was almost biblical. She didn't even blame and shame him. She just wanted answers because she truly loved him. And when she realized what had happened, she was completely betrayed.
Do you know of any of, and I don't know if you would know any of this, but with any of the survivors, it could be Nassar survivors or other survivors, do you know much about their medical treatment afterwards, like how that has been? As we were talking of the other day, I was telling you, nope, I don't even go to the doctor, so.
Yeah. So there are a lot of problems. So, and we were talking about it. And if you're all following U of M, Dr. Anderson, who is now passed, he did prostate exams on thousands of men, and he would do that every month or more. And again, under the guise of treatment, it was very close to what Nassar had done. And as a result, having watched the Nassar survivors, they are now coming forward and forcing the hand at U of M. And Dr. Anderson went a step further and also took their semen. They feel violated, and was trying to make because he had an IVF clinic, was trying to make the greatest Black athlete ever. That's how crazy this whole thing gets. And so what happens? So I know from speaking with some of those survivors, they haven't gone to doctors. Many of them who needed to go to doctors were in stage 4 cancer by the time they actually went, because they did not want to go to a doctor. So they ended up with prostate cancer and died, or are suffering through it now. The same thing with those with Nassar. I'm not aware of any. There was one who died by suicide. There have been many attempts, but in the care, the medical community really needs to be trained on not just these kinds of survivors, but any survivor of trauma. There needs to be informed consent each step of the way. I'm going to touch you. Is that okay? Ask permission. Because many of the girls now are having babies. And instead of enjoying that process, as painful as it is, right? We're all excited. We're going to see this new life, and we're experiencing the pain and working through it. And we're smiling. We're still happy, after each contraction passes, I want to see that wonderful face. And every woman has a story about birth who's had children. Well, sadly, what they go through is a trigger. They're not enjoying the birth. What's happening is they go into a sort of shock. It's an ultimate all-time huge trigger, because there's hands up in there, checking their cervix, putting their hands way up in there, turning the baby, doing whatever needs to be done, which is normal. But it's not normal for them, because what they're doing is they're having flashbacks of the rape, of the trauma, of the assault. And that is true not just for the Nassar sister survivors, but for other survivors I have talked to. They don't go see doctors. When they do, It's totally traumatic. One woman contacted me and she said, I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you. And she didn't have anybody else. She'd been raped by a coach, but she lost both her parents and her brother tragically. And she didn't have anybody to talk to. And she said, I have to come and talk to you. I have to talk to you. Anyway, my secretary finally said, if you know anything about how an office runs, be kind to your secretary. So I finally said, okay, set up an afternoon during my lunch hour. I can talk to her. So the woman drove about 6 hours to talk to me. We closed the doors. She did exactly what you saw with Nasser and what I've always done for 17 years on the bench. I let her talk. And I had my court reporter in there and I said, we're going to make a transcript of this. She said, no, I don't need that. I just want to talk to you. I just want to tell somebody. And I said, well, we're going to do it. Anyway, so she told me her story. She told me what she wrote. And then I engaged her as I always do. And we talked and I told her some messages that she could take home. And we had a great time. And you could see that a weight was lifted. And she did at the end say, I want a transcript. I don't remember what we just said. So I sent the transcript home with her, or it was sent to her a few days, but nonetheless, we ordered it. And she gave the transcript to her therapist. And her therapist said, you told Judge Aquilina things that we in therapy never even scratched the surface of. So it moved her therapy forward. They had sort of been at a stalemate. So jump forward a few months after that, she needed to go to a gynecologist and she couldn't go. She couldn't go. And then she had to go. When she realized it. So she went in and she told them, I'm going to have problems. And the nurse stayed with her. And it took a couple of nurses to hold her down as the doctor was doing the test, putting all the instruments in her and all of that. And she was screaming and she screamed out, Judge Aquilina told me I mattered, so I can do this. And and she told me this story. Well, she had to go back a couple of weeks later, but it was to the hospital. Very similar thing happened. And the nurse who was almost the identical scene, but the nurse who was with her then holding her as she was crying and saying, again, Judge Aquilina told me I mattered, so I mattered. The nurse very kindly said, I know that you matter too, so that's two of us who think you matter.
Wow.
Yeah. Now I don't even remember the question, but anyways, so I know that telling the story helps. Oh, I know that. And the medical, there's all sorts of triggers. People don't want to be touched. And so we have to have a whole new way. We have to understand trauma as part of the medical community. Each physician, physical therapist, whomever needs to be trauma informed and also have a connection with trauma-informed therapist or referrals so that you can figure out what to do with this individual because they need and deserve medical treatment. But they're not going to just spread their legs and say, okay, give me my pap smear, because they can't handle it. And they do need to be seen. So we need to do the informed consent. We need to talk them through it, whether it's soothing music or an animal or whatever it is that will help them. There has to be the right prep work. And if there isn't, all we're doing is re-traumatizing them and setting them backward.
So being a victim of sexual assault, it's very isolating a lot of times, and it's hard to know who to trust, even the professionals you don't know. A lot of times, even law enforcement or just different people in this field. And I remember so I've been in contact with you for a couple of years now, and I watched several interviews of you and I was like, damn, she gets this. And so, you were the first person I reached out to when I was sexually harassed at work and stuff. And so, but I needed to know that you understood this before I would reach out to you. And I reached out to you because I was like, well, if I'm so embarrassed and I don't ever have to talk to you again, so I felt safe and stuff like that. But really, what can doctors do? For me, I had to do a lot of research about you and stuff like that. Like if doctors put on their website, interviews that they had so that I know that they understand trauma and stuff, I would feel more comfortable being in that environment. But what are some trauma-informed approaches that would make survivors more comfortable in the medical?
First of all, I'm just so not trained in it, but intuitively, I think it's just
Sure you are.
God given. I haven't ever taken a class on it, but I just
What question don't
intuitively,
you ever ask?
yeah.
What's the one that you don't like?
Yeah. So I never ask why, because why shames and blames. And for those of you that haven't heard the spiel that I do, I want you to just think back to your mother, your auntie, your grandmother, your grandfather, whoever, helped raise you. And you came home from school and they would say, why didn't you finish your homework? Why are you late? Why are you wearing that? Why are you dating him? Why didn't you get your hair cut? I mean, it doesn't matter what the why is. Why shames and blames? Why needs to retire to research in science and stay there. So asking the open-ended questions, but also I have filled out a lot of forms with a lot of doctors because I'm old. And they always say, how many abortions have you had? Have you been sexually assaulted? Do you feel safe at home? Those kinds of things. And there's a whole list of questions that we're all asked, but it's a sheet of paper. It's a checkoff box, and it's not a human being. I am not. If I am a survivor of any trauma, I'm simply not putting it on a form that I don't know where it's going. And I don't care if it's only going to the doctor, because the doctor has a receptionist and staff, and they might know somebody I know. So there's no trust. So I think that doctors have to have conversations and say, what would you like me to know? What else is going on with you? How can I help? And not rely on those damn questionnaires that have 1,000 questions that are impersonal, because when you are going through trauma, you already feel like you don't count and you don't matter. Those forms make it more so. You don't really matter. So we need to get real personal. And yes, is it going to take more time for a doctor to do that? Yes. And if we demand that, I think that we should get that. I think that we all deserve that time with our doctor, and they should be informed. There are things that a doctor can do, like you're saying, should it be on a website? Well, I don't know if it should be on a website. It could be on a website where in this day and age, everybody Googles and they do all sorts of things. It could be, I'm trauma informed. Download this pamphlet. So at least there's an understanding that this doctor gets it. We can go beyond the stethoscope, what's really happened with me, and it will stay there. That they have a network, that every doctor's office, therapist's office should have a network of resources to really help the person. There should be information about if somebody has been raped. Can I help you? Help them report. Where do they go? What evidence is still there if it's, months or days or years later? There should be information about human trafficking in every doctor's office, and the staff should all be trained to recognize domestic violence and human trafficking. So if you have a woman or a young girl where a man will not leave them alone, or maybe even an older woman won't leave them alone, where someone comes in with way too many infections, where there are certain bruises, or a young girl is dressed with too much makeup, clothes that are too old for her, doesn't have her own phone number or way of communicating, or a woman doesn't, you can contact my husband or my boyfriend or whatever it is. There's all sorts of things that can be taught so that it can be reported. There is no crime for false reporting suspected child abuse, suspected domestic violence. All right. If you get it wrong, it's okay. If you get it right, you save a life.
Judge Aquilina, we actually have a question in the chat for you. What do you believe the culpability of the complicit institutions should be?
Mm-hmm.
Are lawsuits enough to prevent such institutional betrayal and gaslighting regarding institutions as Michigan State, USA Gymnastics, Bella and Martha Carioli?
Yeah, great question. So I think a lot of things. I think that when institutions like U of M right now is not giving over, same as Michigan State, not giving over documents, not giving over medical information, not dealing with this. Michigan State still has over 6,000 documents they refuse to give over. Even the Attorney General has thrown up their hands in Michigan and said, well, I can't go any farther. Bullshit. You know what talks in our world? Money. So if Michigan State University would not get federal funding until they complied with the law, guess who would give up the papers? If the Olympics to be cleaned up, I think every sponsor, Coca-Cola, General Motors, whoever sponsors the Olympics, they ought to pull out. And we as consumers should make them pull out and say, you cannot sponsor, because we're not going to buy Coke and we're not going to buy a GM vehicle or whatever it is that whoever the sponsors are these days. We're not going to support you until you pull out. And then when the Olympics gets cleaned up, then we will support you. Then you can support them. So we need to take the money aspect and use it, because what they're doing is they're using money and medals over the safety of athletes and students. And so what we need to do is to say, okay, we can do that too. We're going to take away your funding. We will not fund you unless you turn over the documents, until you have real rules, until you do the training, until you're not just talking the talk, but you're doing the walk, and you're training from the dean of the college all the way down to the person who collects the garbage. Every single person who works on that campus, who works in a hospital, who works wherever, should be trained on how to report trauma, how to help someone, how to recognize child abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, and there should be consequences, including if a police officer, for example, in New York, if a police officer breaks the law, right, uses his badge to use the drugs that he pulled off the street and, becomes a drug dealer themselves or whatever, which has happened, they lose their retirement. They don't just go to jail, they lose all their retirement. If we looked at those kinds of consequences, we might see some action. Additionally, you all need to do informed voting. We need to hold judges and prosecutors and legislators, everybody accountable. Here's a problem. I hate to keep talking about Nassar, but he's not the only one. But we mentioned Trinae Gonzo. She's assaulted 850 times. Do you think there were 850 charges? No, there were 29 charges. If you look at each person, even if they didn't know yet about the 505 who've come forward, and I know there are more, even if you just look at the 29, if you just look at them, there are probably over 5,000 counts, maybe 50,000 counts. I don't know. Why were they not charged? If someone has a home invasion and someone breaks into the house, and then they break into the garage or into the store next door, and it's one continuous sort of act of crime, they get charged for each and every offense. Why isn't every rape charged? Why does a prosecutor get to tell a victim, again, you don't matter? One is good enough when they were actually assaulted hundreds of times. We need accountability, real, actual accountability.
I have another question. What can medical personnel do to ensure evidence collected is admissible in court? In other words, in what ways have you seen evidence thrown out in regards to sexual assault?
So chain of custody, doctors should be, whoever's in the medical field collecting the evidence needs to be apprised of chain of custody, so that it's not that you're collecting something, doing a test, and then suddenly you have to go to the bathroom, so something's left unattended. That'll get tossed. You need to make sure that the evidence, there's a chain of custody. You need to make sure that rape kits are tested. Why is there not a law saying, how come we can get a COVID test in 24 hours? We get the results. Why is that? But on a rape kit, they go for months without testing. There should be a penalty for that. And there should be legislation in all of our states saying that a rape kit must be tested within 24 hours. We need some real accountability. We need the evidence collected properly, stored properly. We need to teach people that when something's reported, it all has to be documented. I think overall hospitals do a good job, and there's court rules that allow, if I go into the ER and I say I've been raped, and I point the finger at someone, and at whatever I say, that it can go in the emergency doctors in my file. And that is admissible in court because it was for treatment. So the documentation has to be there, has to be dictated in time, has to be legible and turned over to the prosecutor. When a victim wishes to speak, they should speak not just to the doctor, but perhaps the doctor could call in someone who's forensically trained, because when a victim tells their story over and over and over again, it can change and the evidence can be tainted, especially when you get a child. When a child has been raped and keeps telling the same story over and over again, it can change each time because of how the adult asks the questions. You have to be forensically trained. So we need
SANE nurses. You guys have that in?
Yes, the SANE nurses are forensically trained.
And I think we have some SANE nurses that are on the chat too.
And, they could have conversations with the ER docs or with whomever else might touch a patient, because, and I don't know if that happens or not, but SANE nurses testify and they're terrific when they testify. But I don't always see that with all the rest, because sometimes things get tainted. People won't go to the same nurse. They might go somewhere else because they don't want to yet admit they were raped.
So one person asks, have you noticed any pattern or transition during the legal process of victims transitioning from self-identifying with the term victims to that of survivor?
Yes. I think especially since the Nassar case, I dubbed them sister survivors, and many of them came up to him and said, I am no longer a victim. I am not a number. I am a name. And I dubbed them sister survivors because they really in front of me formed this very strong bond and sisterhood. They didn't even know each other, many of them. And Tarana Burke has really talked about going from victim to survivor to thriver. And I think that people are now seeing and learning so much about it. And they see that, you don't want to stay a victim, because being a victim really is a weak term. I mean, it says that somehow you were victimized, right? And you need to get past that. So using the term, I am a survivor, there's strength in that. I am going to thrive. I matter. That takes away the power of the abuser, and it really plants that strong seed of a superhero in the victim to become that strong survivor and thriver. And I think more victims who are coming forward and feeling the power of using their voice are saying, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a survivor. I'm going to thrive. I could do this. My gosh, what else can I do? I'm going to do it. And the other thing we need to be mindful of is when a victim says, well, I'm only one voice. Turn it around, get rid of only, strike it. Have them repeat, I am a voice. I am a strong voice. I matter. Don't let anybody only themselves, or don't only someone. Well, you're only one of many. This happens a lot. No. That's really diminishing language. So we need to keep our conversation with them that they are strong, they are survivors, that every strong thing they do makes their predator weaker.
I remember in the legal system when I was navigating that, and I would come to you about different things and just, well, they said I can't do this, and just like feeling like I'm hitting a brick wall a lot of times. And here's Judge Aquilina coming in saying like she always had a solution for something. Like it's that just watch me thing where, oh, well, if that doesn't work, then here's a different route, and you never let it falter moving forward and stuff like that. So
well, I want you to all think about this. You own the legal system. I work for you. The police work for you. You have a right to make a police report. You have a right to have that rape kit tested. You have a right to speak out. You have a right to speak in my court. You have a right to be part of a process that protects you and to be heard. So keep on speaking out. There is always a way around. I get a lot of calls from people or emails, texts, Instagrams, whatever. And there's so many who say the police wouldn't let me make a report. I say, you go back and make a report. And if they won't, you go to the attorney general, you go to the state police. You keep talking until you get that damn report and they do an investigation. That is your right. They work for us. We have to stop thinking about all these powerful people and that they're more powerful than us. No, they're not. They work for us. I work for you.
Yeah.
What a wonderful sentiment. We have one more, actually a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you for the work you do. How do we move our justice system as a whole away from the blame, shame, boys will be boys way of thinking, and more towards trauma-informed and victim-focused? As a saying, it's discouraging to serve these survivors only to know they will be traumatized over and over again with very few cases go to court, or easier no sentence to assailants.
Yeah, it really is hard. I mean, as a judge, I myself have been bullied by other judges, and there's a lot of male judges who don't like what I do and what I've always done. I've had the sheriff for my whole career. Now we have a new sheriff, but it's the son of the old sheriff. He's better, but they don't like what I do. They like the boys will be boys. They like that power over us. I say we take it down. We should never say boys will be boys. Okay, that says, well, it's okay for them to treat us like this. Well, it's not. We have to get rid of that mentality. And for those people who are in power, again, use your voice when you vote. Ask them what they're going to do about this problem. Ask them if you matter and what they're going to do. What's the legislation? What's the plan? And if they can't answer, go on to the next candidate. Forget Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever the title is. Look at their platform. Are they informed about sexual assault? Are they informed that at least half of all women, because really, if you look at the studies, it's half of all women will be assaulted in some form. Is that acceptable? It's not acceptable to me. If somehow that's acceptable to them, and they don't have a plan, move on or run for office yourself. Make sure that as women, we stand together. One of the things that women do is to not support each other for any multiple number of reasons, but let's support each other. Don't allow people to say boys will be boys. Don't say to each other or let anybody say about another woman or you, well, she's just upset because she has PMS. When someone tells me I have PMS, I say, yeah, I'm going to own that. You know what that means to me? I promote, mentor, and support women. What do you do? Put people in their place. You don't have to punch them. You don't have to file a lawsuit. You simply have to flip the script. And sometimes you do need to file a lawsuit. Please don't punch them. But, you can punch them with your words. We really have a lot of work to do, and women need to stand together. And let me just tell you that we cannot do it alone. We must partner with men. We cannot do to men what they have done to us. We cannot exclude them. Men are exclusive, women are inclusive. Remember, we need to be inclusive so that they can help us solve this problem and stand with us. And the good men will and do stand with us.
I really appreciate that pragmatism. I just want to chime in and say something I've observed is that a lot of these systems, are made up mostly of women. It often does feel like it's women not standing together or supporting each other. It's not so much men, it's our own kind doing this to us sometimes. And we have an additional comment in the chat for you. I think you really helped those women and girls who were abused by Nasser by letting them speak. Young people, especially girls and women, can be overlooked so easily and often are. A problem that we need to find solutions for.
Yeah. Again, it's that only thing they're only women. They're only children. Get rid of the only. We're human beings and we all need to be treated with respect. And we all need to know that we matter and we need to help others matter as well. And why do we have to be believed? If I say I was raped, people say, really? Well, if I say my house was broken into, they say, let me call the cop for you. What? Okay, why is there that difference? Why does anybody have to explain that they just went through trauma, regardless of what kind, domestic violence, human trafficking, rape, whatever it is, a wrongful touching on a bus? I've had those cases too. So even a small touching that's unwanted is a crime. Why do we have to explain how it made us feel? Just get us some help.
Yeah, we have to a lot of times convince people and stuff. And, if somebody says, hey, I have cancer, you don't say, oh, I believe you. You just, but we talk about how that's what you need to tell survivors is that you believe them. And so it should be that automatic, you believe them without having to announce it or tell someone. In the courtroom, what trauma behaviors that have surfaced in your courtroom?
I had a woman a few months ago. We were in a jury trial and she had been assaulted. And in order for her to talk about it, we had to take breaks about every 15 minutes. It took 2 days to get testimony that if this wasn't a rape, if she wasn't so traumatized, probably would have been about 2 hours. We spent the better part of 2 days listening to 15 minutes at a time and then taking a break for 15 to 30 minutes. And I learned from the prosecutor that during the time that we were off the record, she was on the bathroom floor curled in a ball. I do allow service animals in. I go around to all those seminars that we all go to. And when they have those squeezy balls, I bring them, I grab as many as I can and I give them to people who are going to testify. Our Court of Appeals did a terrible thing and the legislature has yet to fix it. But in Michigan, an adult is not allowed when they're testifying, like for sexual assault or any kind of trauma, they're not allowed a service dog. Now, if they're blind, that's different, but they're not allowed a service dog because the Court of Appeals said, well, that could gain sympathy, which is not an element of the crime from the jury, which is absolutely crazy. However, if you're a child, they will allow the dog to be with you. That's a little bit crazy. Actually, it's a lot crazy. When the dogs come in, they lay at the person's feet while they testify. They're hardly noticeable, but it does make that person who's testifying and who's gone through trauma so much more comfortable. And I see the difference. And so our legislature hopefully will catch up and undo the wrong that was done. But I saw a woman who was traumatized by being raped. She was supposed to testify and she came in with a blood alcohol level of a 0.38. I would be dead at that point. Clearly she had a drinking problem, but it doesn't matter. She came in and she was totally smashed. And so I actually had to hold her in contempt and put her in lockup, which I know sounds harsh, but given the circumstances, I had to do that. They cleaned her up. We got her sober. And then she was able to testify. And then she continued in jail until I put her in the hospital because the withdrawal was so bad. And her kids were actually very happy she went to be dried out. They were hoping that she would stay dried out. But because of the rape and because of other trauma that happened to her, she just couldn't stay sober. I suspect she is no longer living, but we did get her to testify. And while she was in that drunken state, she also had a worry rock, which I don't allow in my courtroom anymore. I tell people to get any of those other therapy kinds of things, the squeezy balls or what have you. But what she did was threw the rock at me. She was so mad at the justice system, she threw the rock at me. Now she missed because she was too drunk, but I've seen all sorts of different reactions. I've also witnessed, and juries don't always understand this, but sometimes victims laugh. And laughing doesn't mean they weren't raped. Laughing is a response to being raped. Some people cry, some people laugh. There's all sorts of things that happen when someone's raped. Another thing that has happened is under cross-examination, and I hate seeing this, but we know it happens. Defense counsel will say, well, if this really happened, you would have reported it when it happened. Now, what people also need to be trained on and informed on is that your body is really, really smart. So when you're being attacked, when you're at gunpoint, your breasts are being cut, whatever the trauma is that someone's doing to you, the last thing you're going to think about is, oh, I'm being raped. Your body, your brain goes into, oh, I want to save my life. So they might not even remember for months or years that they were raped. They might not remember half the things that have happened to them. I've seen women come in with cut breasts, cigarette burns, bruised head to toe, teeth missing, all of those things. And the last thing they talk about is being raped because they just wanted to live. And our bodies are so smart. God made them to say, I want to live. And so we see this coming out in court.
Mm-hmm. What can the average person do to help fix the inequities and shortcomings in the judicial system?
Lobby for change, talk to your legislators. When you see a wrong, you can always report a judge to Judicial Tenure Commission, to the Supreme Court. There's the State Court Administrator's Office. You can work with your legislature to tell them your story, make it personal, or your friend's story or your daughter's story, and ask for changes legislatively. We don't have enough of that. And legislators, they focus on the popular items. And sadly, women, we're just not popular, are we? We're just those loud people who bear babies and clean houses, right? A lot of the legislators are men and they don't want to hear from us. I worked on the Senate floor for a decade at a time when there were only 3 women on the Senate floor. And I was one of them. And, the legislators, the female legislators, there were 2 at the time. Actually, there were 3 female legislators and there were 2 staff people. Those were the only females on the floor for many years. And I watched as the female legislators would have to scream at the top of their lungs so that they could actually make a record because the men would not respect them enough to shut up and let them speak. Mm-hmm. So, get in someone's face, get together. When someone knocks on your door for a lawn sign, say, this is the legislation I need. When are you going to pass it? Learn a little bit about the legislative process. The funny thing is a legislator will tell you, yeah, I'll put in the bill request. I'll see it'll take about 4 months. No, it won't. They each get priority bills. They can have it within 2 to 3 days or sooner. Then they'll say, well, it's stuck in committee. Well, it's not stuck in committee. All you have to do is go to the floor and make a motion, pull it out of committee and bring it to the floor. Things don't have to take years to pass. We as women need to stand together and demand better, demand accountability, demand legislation that speaks to these issues, demand that the money that we all work and pay in taxes gets used to solve these problems and to deny universities, hospitals, and any place who receives funding, that funding when they are not acting appropriately in regard to sexual assault, bullying, human trafficking, any of the things that we've seen happen.
Do you have any thoughts about reducing sexual assaults on college campuses?
That, I went to Michigan State and there were a lot of rapes then. And here it is, I graduated from Michigan State in 1979 and we're still having a lot of rapes in Michigan State. I think it's a campus problem because there's prey there. I've never understood why there's not security. At the mall, there's security. Why isn't there more security on the campuses? I know that we have security guys, just driving in their vehicles, but why aren't they where the students are? Why isn't there a program where you can call someone to take you back to your dorm or your apartment? Why aren't we protected? Why isn't there a record of the assaults and then the students separated or taken out of class until it's resolved? And some campuses do that, but others don't, so that students are going back to the same class with their predator. The rules have to be stricter. There needs to be training. There needs to be more people watching out for students. And we need some security clearances, quite honestly, with the professors. I'm in the military. I've had security clearances. People we hire in the court have security clearances. Why don't we have the professors and everybody else that's on campus have a security clearance? Why are we allowing just anybody to roam a campus? We shouldn't. Those are cities where our children go and they are prey. Why are they open campuses like that? It's not that we're asking that nobody can be allowed, because there's a lot of functions that go on, but why can't we have some accountability of who enters? Why are you there? Where are you going? And we don't do that. So we have predators go there and we have kids missing from every campus around the country.
If I can chime in,
Sure.
actually just a comment from me. The rape of a student is what inspired the creation of this class, and the university's response and investigation is what inspired this class in part. So we have a question. How do you best get a jury to understand the trauma response? When doing a deposition, it became apparent the importance of understanding, because people have a preconceived idea of what a trauma victim looks like. If they came in and were wailing or crying or not have distinct physical injuries, then it must not have happened.
Right. So SANE nurses do an awesome job testifying, and it really is on a case-by-case basis. But there's all sorts of experts, trauma experts, who could be called in. And so if you are a victim or you know a victim, you're working in the arena, testify. Do you know how many therapists will not go into court to testify?
Yeah.
Lots. So we need to hear from the experts. This is a natural response. And then the attorney should be calling those experts. And of course, there'll be experts on both sides. But first of all, it's really difficult to get doctors to want to come to testify. It's really difficult to get therapists to want to come to testify. But it's really important that we have those trained experts, qualified, and that they inform the jury. And I think that the state bar, the law schools, I think the law schools and the medical schools should partner together to have cross training, because lawyers need to know about trauma, about how to ask questions of their clients, about how to do even a cross-examination without having the victim flip out on them, and they do that because, they're trying to get at the truth. Cross-examination is the greatest truth teller, but what they're doing is re-traumatizing the victim, and they can very well lose their case, which, you all can say, well, that's a good thing. But maybe it's not a good thing. They can lose their case because now we have the jury feeling sorry for the person that's being cross-examined, which is completely appealable. And we don't want the re-traumatization. In a bad case, there could have to be a new trial. Imagine that 3 or 4 or 5 years later, having to relive that. So we all want to get it right. Why don't we have cross-training between the medical schools and the legal schools? Why? That's an easy thing to do.
One thing to note about the therapists is I went to many therapists to try to, because I was involved in the legal system, a lot of them would not see me. It was really hard to find a therapist. On the other side, being a therapist, I totally understand that, because they're not trained they don't want to be cross-examined. And I had a therapist tell me that it gives her great anxiety, and she was concerned about ruining the case or, like doing harm to their client, So I get that on both sides. But yeah, it's challenging to have all these professionals be working together and being able to provide victims with the necessary services and stuff. And a lot of times when victims are talking and stuff, they are talking in fragmented sentences or not sharing their story in chronological order and that kind of stuff. So it makes people skeptical a lot of times if their story is true, and so, yeah, having witness testimony is great for that.
Well, and I want to say something about trauma too, just overall. Everybody should be trained to never tell a trauma survivor that they need to learn a lesson from the abuse or from, walking out at night or in that short skirt or what have you. Or, well, just be glad it wasn't worse. I mean, all you're doing is re-traumatizing the victim, and it's going to shut them up and shut them down. And it's horrifying to them. There are so many missteps in the arena of trauma, especially sexual assault, but trauma comes in all sorts of forms.
So I want to be careful with your time and stuff like that. Like, I don't want to run over. Thank you so, so much. This means a lot to us. Everyone has been excited about you speaking and stuff. You've been in this field for many, many years and you've seen a lot. You're an expert in a wide range of things. One last thing I wanted to ask is, with all the trauma and stuff that you work with in the court system, how do you not take your work home with you?
You know what? I do a lot of things. I write, I paint, I cook, I make these crazy little Christmas ornaments. I make bracelets. I do lots of things. So if it's only 15 minutes and I'm going to bed, I'll make a bracelet. See, I'm wearing some of them. Because they take and actually just bought a whole bunch of stuff. And the cashier says, "Do you sell these?" I said, "No, I use them instead of going to a therapist. I make bracelets." And she had a good laugh. But it's about self-care. If you do not do self-care, to take yourself out of whatever happened in your day, you will self-implode. So whether it's yoga, a walk, talking to your dog, cooking, something that you enjoy. And of course, I hug my kids and I read for pleasure. I listen to Audible. I do lots of things that are just for me because I need to give my brain a break. So it's really, really important. So do we have another minute? Yeah.
But I said, if you haven't checked out your recipes and stuff, you are an amazing cook in magazines and stuff. And I made like your stuffed mushrooms one time. It didn't really look like, it didn't look as good as yours, but they were really good. They taste really good. But yeah, you are just very talented.
I had a cooking column in Scene magazine for about 16 months or so, and then COVID hit. So, and I'm working on a recipe book. I'm doing all sorts of things, fun things. You have to do that, especially with
your
what
Halloween
you're all
stuff
doing.
was pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah. So, but you know what? I always do this thing, and I want you to pass it on to someone especially a young girl or just somebody in need. But I want you to join me, and I'm going to borrow your hands. And you may have seen me do this, but now you're going to do it with me. So turn on all of it. I want to see all your faces, and then I want to use your hands and take off your volume. I want to hear your voices, ladies. How about your voices? Loud and proud. Loud and proud. Remember, you are the voice. You are the power. You are the leaders for change. No more victims. So I want you to do this with me. Unmute yourself. I order you. Unmute yourself. Come on, unmute yourself. Really loud. Okay. So your neighbors can hear it. Okay. Cheerleader voices. All right. I want you to do what I'm doing. All right.
Okay.
All right. I have a voice.
I have a voice.
I am victorious.
I am victorious.
Victorious.
I am a woman.
I am a woman.
For those of you who are men, we're inviting you to join our club, okay? I am a woman. I turn that W into an M. I matter.
I matter.
I am powerful.
I
am powerful.
Spread the word, right? I have a voice, right? I have a voice. I am victorious. I am a woman. I matter. I am powerful. Pass that on, okay? And if you don't want to say woman, because it's a mixed group, because as I said, women are inclusive, just say I am a warrior, because we are all warriors in this fight together. So please join me. Pass it on, be inspirational, ask for accountability, demand better for yourself and for others.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It
Yes.
sounds like we're wrapping up. Do you have just a couple more minutes to hang on after?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Thank you all so much, everyone. I'll just stand up from behind the podium. Thank you so much for coming. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your patience, and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so incredibly much. Liz, thank you so much.
That goes by so fast. Like,
Yeah, it
We had a
does. Like there's
conversation the other
100 other
day.
topics we were going to talk about, right?
oh yeah. And that's why I'm glad we didn't like follow a script, so.
Yeah.
I
Well,
knew the other day we were just like, we could be talking forever.
forever. Yeah. Well, I can come back. We can do the movie thing, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a really great class that you started. We could actually do the film and do it that way.
Sure. Yeah. I some folks messaged us privately saying they really loved that idea. They'd love to be part of the discussion. So
Yeah, we've done it at University of Minnesota. We did it at Cooley. We did it at, I don't know, countless universities. We've done it at just a lot of different places for different reasons, but it's always an interesting discussion.
I loved it because it really talks about the parents talking about their experience of what happened, and same with all the girls, and they go into
Yeah.
detail. Sorry. This is
Yeah,
a
it's
social
great.
work student, and she is going to go into law as well. So
Oh, good. Good.
just to be like you. So yeah, I will be in touch with you, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I think it went well, if I could speak.
Yeah.
And I'm not sweating too bad, okay?
Oh, you did. You're funny. You did just great. You did
Hey,
just
I always have to wear like dark clothes so that I don't sweat. Who cares? Maybe I'll keep people away from me, right? Those stupid men.
Yeah, I know. Well, you had a man in the room. That was good. I always enjoy seeing men in the group.
Yeah.
we have
3 in the class.
I was gonna say, we do have, well, I think we have more at the start of the semester, but we had several men sign up for the course, which is really good. And one of them is a 4th-year student on his way to residency. So he's gonna put those skills to use immediately, which is cool.
Yeah. I teach at least once a year. I teach defending battered women, and it is about 90% women, but there's always a few men who take it and, are really into it and can't believe, and they're taking it because they've gone through some trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate your comment about partnering with men. I think that's really
Yeah.
important. And it's important to have those people in the room because those are the voices that other men usually will listen to before they listen to the rest of us.
Right.
How old are the twins now? Are they 10,
11 and a half.
11? So boy and girl. So
Yeah. So they're in
Which
6th
one's
grade and
more
they're just
challenging?
wild. They're into everything. And I'm just, I say no TikTok, no this, no that. Then it's on their phone. Then I take it off. I'm going to, there's, oh my gosh. So I'm struggling with.
TikTok could be a good coping skill though if you're learning the dances.
It is, but there's also a lot of really bad creeps on there.
Yeah. I don't like
So-
some of the stuff on there.
Yeah, actually, YouTube is better monitored than TikTok.
Oh, nice. So I will not take any more of your time up, but thank you so much. And it's like 8:00 your time right now. So-
Yeah. Well, it's okay. It was really great to talk with all of you. And, this is really about spreading the word, planting seeds for thought. I mean, I don't have all the answers. It's so huge. And what I do know, we could talk about for weeks, but I'm not trained in it. So I'm sure that, there's much more. It's just getting the ideas out and connecting law and medicine and sports and education and all of that to question, retrain, rethink what we're doing.
And we were talking the other day about like just assuming that every person has experienced trauma. So using that trauma informed approach with everything, and every profession should be trained in that stuff. It's
Right. You
not
don't
just-
have to be raped to have suffered trauma. There's all
Yeah.
sorts of trauma in the world, and every single human has suffered some. And then how it comes out is different in everybody. So there has to be that trauma-informed approach. And it can't be, oh, you check a box in a form. Who's going to tell you that? Check a box and then your doctor never mentions it, or your therapist never mentions it, or it's mentioned in passing. We have to change things, a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of systems need to be changed. So, well, I'll be in touch with you soon.
All right. Yep. Thanks. It was lovely to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks. Bye.